I'm supposed to be this big innovator in my field. Oh, Patty, she's the guru of HR. She's reinvented it. Here's what I did that was radical. I stopped doing stupid stuff that doesn't matter. If you walked in the door today, would I still hire you? That's the Netflix keeper test. You know why people sue companies? Because they're pissed off. Who is it that I'm going to have to present my idea to in order to get approval, in order to execute? I'm like, oh, for God's sake, you've been here a week. Haven't you done anything yet? We hired you to do something, not to present it. And I'd like you to stop being such a moody asshole, because it's really hard for people who need something from you to not know what kind of mood you're in.
Yaniv, she's really got your number dialed in here. This is great.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode, in-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption, the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Patty McCord.
We have such a treat for you today. It's a bit of a long episode, but worth every minute of your time. We are talking to one of the absolute legends of Silicon Valley about how to build an incredible culture and the top 5 mistakes founders make when building a team. You do not want to miss this one. Stay tuned. We'll get onto it right after the break. This episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by Vanta. I get it. You hear security and compliance and you think time-consuming and stressful, but it's critical for scaling your business. Achieving compliance with ISO 27001, SOC 2, Essential 8, or other in-demand frameworks can unlock major growth for your company, help you sell to the enterprise, and establish customer trust. And with Vanta, you can get compliant in weeks instead of months and save up to 85% of associated costs. And just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the top mistakes founders make when building a team. To discuss this topic with us, we have a very special guest. So Patty has had a long career as an HR leader at legendary Silicon Valley firms such as Sun Microsystems and Pure Software. But what she is best known for is her 14 years at the helm of the people function at Netflix, where she worked side by side with CEO Reed Hastings to build one of the most opinionated and effective company cultures in all of tech. The principles by which Patty and Reed ran Netflix were codified in the famous Culture Deck and later discussed in Patty's book Powerful, Building a Culture of Freedom and Responsibility. She is a sought-after speaker and consultant and has recently launched a podcast of her own called TruthWorks, which you should definitely listen to. So this is a bit of a fanboy moment for me. I've been deeply influenced by Patty's work and applied many of the lessons from Powerful at my own startup. This episode has been over a year in the making. I'm so excited we could finally do it. Patty McCord, welcome to the Startup Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Very cool to have you on the show, Patty. Thank you for joining us.
Let's do this thing. Yeah.
So rather than getting you to tell your story up front, which is difficult because you're so good at it, what we're going to do is discuss the top 5 mistakes that founders make when building a team, and we can weave in your wisdom as we go. So we're going to jump right in with mistake number 1, which is tolerating mediocre performance. And maybe a way to start that, Patty, is actually with one of the stories that you talk about a lot. In fact, Reed mentioned it in his book as well, which is in the early days at Netflix, when you hit tough times and you had to do some layoffs and the feeling you had afterwards.
Before I get to that story, let me give you sort of my perspective on early stage startups and who you hire. So the first 50 to 100 people that you hire have 3 things in common. They're the smartest people you can find for what you can afford to pay them, right? So they'll come for the salary and they're very smart. They work very hard because the thing about early startups is that the problems that you're setting out to solve usually haven't been solved by anybody else. And so mostly what you do in an early stage is make mistakes, right? Your whiteboard's not full of like, that was great. It's full of, we did not that, not that, not that, not that. So you want really smart people, people who work really hard and who believe. And the belief is a full third of it, because in the early stages, all startups are kind of stupid ideas. I mean, let's face it. If it was obvious, somebody else would be doing it. Okay, so now that's who you've got on board. And you tend to hire people who have those three characteristics and are kind of generalists, right? Because there's so much stuff to do. Maybe there's some roles that are clear, a software engineering role, a finance role, a marketing role. I mean, those might be sort of kinda, but everybody pitches in and helps when they can. And so my secret sauce, the really important thing I want to tell those of you who are hiring in early stage startups, is hiring is a skill, it's a discipline, and you can learn to get better at it. So there aren't some people that are better at it than others. There aren't some people who have the most clever questions. There aren't some people who everybody likes the interview. I mean, there are all those things, but they don't really matter. So the most important thing to do, especially as a leader, is to look forward. Here's my methodology for hiring great people. In 6 months, if you hired the most amazing team, and everybody in the organization was like, oh my God, these guys are really getting shit done. This is incredible. What would it look like? What would people be saying and doing? And I say, make a movie of it, right? Are there more meetings? Are there less meetings? Are people just heads down and working hard? Are people arguing about something that's really important, right? Are people spending a lot of time with customers? Are people spending a lot of time on the product? What's going on that's not happening now? So more is not an answer. I know we've got 15 engineers, and if we hire 15 more, we'll get twice as much work done. You will not, because now you're going to have twice as many confused people.
I feel like what you talk about is true in so many domains that we actually talk about on this podcast, right? Which is this sort of working backwards from a future state. On last week's episode of the podcast, I was talking about the fact that so many founders, when they're raising capital, they get to the bit of the deck where they're use of funds, and they're 60% product, 20% marketing, 20% ops. I'm that doesn't tell me anything.
I can't tell you how many companies I've consulted to, and they're we really want you to help us scale. Okay, what scaling issue do you have? Well, we have 150 people. We need 300 by the end of the year. What's the number 300? Well, we got enough money to hire twice as many people. What are the problems that the team isn't solving now? Get as clear as you can about that. What would somebody need to know how to do in order to accomplish that thing in 6 months? One of the things that happens in startups in particular is you hire somebody you love, who's a great culture fit, who has tons of potential. And that might mean they're going to able to do what you need them to do in 4 years.
Right.
Not in 6 months, right? Okay. So I've got that in my head. Then and only then, who do you got? And that's going to allow you to take a look at every single person on your team and say, knowing what I know now, knowing what we need to do in 6 months, knowing what greatness looks like, knowing what we need to accomplish, if you walked in the door today, would I still hire you? That's the Netflix keeper test. And it doesn't mean that you screwed up by hiring a bunch of mediocre people. That's almost never true. I mean, you do. We make mistakes, right? And part of it, the mistakes we make in startups, is because we don't really know what it is they're supposed to do. We guess. Yeah, we need somebody who's going to be able to. You seem like the guy. You're the guy, Chris, who can do that, right? And then I hire you, and I realize, shit, you don't know it. You can't. I mean, it's not that you don't want to, and not that you're not excited about it. You just literally can't. So if you do that methodology, that's going to teach you how to not only figure out how to write the job description. So job descriptions are typically, I need somebody who's smart, quick on their feet, good decision maker, somebody just like me. And hires, and you wonder why you can't ever come up with a new solution to any problem because you've hired all the same people. If you think about that problem instead of what it takes to be qualified to solve it, then you're going to open up your mind to a whole lot of different ways of solving that problem. So that's who you want to hire, and then be really disciplined about putting it together. And how I learned that was at Netflix back in the day when we were a DVD by mail business. We had a meeting that we literally had in the parking lot every Friday. We called it the metrics meeting. We would pass out to everybody in the parking lot a sheet that had our 6 top metrics on it, bar charts and graphs, right? Here's how much money we have. Here's what it's costing us to mail a DVD to a customer. Here's what marketing's costing. Here's what the payroll is. Here's what this is. Here's what this is. And oh, by the way, let's do the math. Here's what's coming in. Here's what's going out. And remember that in the DVD by mail business in particular, it was very, very capital intensive. We had to buy the discs, we had to buy the envelopes. So we weren't like at the time, most of the other startups that were a social network or just software. I don't mean that. But,
There's a real ops part of the business.
the ops was the business. That was most of our innovation was around shipping DVDs. So it's the end of the year. We are literally running out of money. We are just out of money. And everybody knows that there's nothing left to cut. And so we laid off a third of the company. What we did was we said, if we succeeded, what will we need to be able to accomplish? If we really, really could pull this off, and if anybody is standing in that parking lot who's not directly effective in accomplishing that, then it's not that they're mediocre. We just don't need them. And that was like this huge scales from my eyes to be able to say, I wonder if I can actually say to another human, we just don't need you anymore.
Yeah, it's hard.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't need a sales force. Nobody wants to put ads on our service. We don't need people who are writing. We had all these people who wrote reviews and we had hired them from all these magazines. But the truth was our customers would do it for free. We said, what if we were successful, if we were really successful and we went public? I looked around and my finance department had 2 people that had ever worked in a public company. And it's not that they weren't terrific. I mean, the head of payroll wanted to be a CFO some year, but not next year. So that's where it's not really that you make a mistake and hire somebody mediocre. If you do, that's just to chuck that, right? It's just it's not going to work, right? You give somebody a chance, give them a couple of chances. If the truth is, in your heart of hearts they can't, then save everybody a lot of pain and suffering. We can go on to how I feel about performance improvement plans and stuff like that. But basically what I learned was after the layoff, we had a third as many people. That Christmas, DVD players dropped to $100. And if you were in America that Christmas, you had one under your Christmas tree. And inside the DVD player was a coupon that said, try Netflix for free. And our business went, whoosh. I mean, it's insane, right? So we were doing twice as much work with a third as many people. And it was more fun. And I remember talking to somebody about it. And I said, okay, so we got money now. We raised another round. We're going to be profitable. We really can see it someday. How about a couple more people on your team? There were 4 people and there's only you. And he said, well, one of them wasn't very good. And I checked his work all the time. So let's say that took me an hour or 2 a day because I checked his work every day. Another person, remember, he really liked playing his guitar. He's really talented, but he wanted to be a musician more than he wanted to be a software engineer. And the other person was better than me. You shouldn't have let him go. But guess what? I do his work and mine now, and it's a lot more interesting. And so then I was like, wait a minute. Maybe my understanding, because I grew up in Silicon Valley, was that the rule is you make more money, you have more customers, you have more revenue, you double the revenue, you double the profit, you double the employee base. That's how it goes, right? And as soon as you get more money, the first thing you do is hire more people. And I started to think about, wait a minute, it's more about assembling the right team.
There's a few things you said in there that I think are really interesting. I'd love to comment on and unpack. You said as a young team, you want the smartest people around, and you generally have the smartest people around. As part of our show, we're talking about democratizing and globalizing the Silicon Valley principles, right? And you want to hope you have the smartest people around because a lot of founders are often just hiring their mates and hiring whoever's around in their little town. And
because they're the only ones that'll come. I mean, it's easy.
It's usually a combination of they're the ones that I know, they're the ones that are in front of me, they're the ones that'll come.
That I can convince this is a good idea.
Right, exactly. And so that point I think is worth making very clearly to founders listening is you need to try to find the smartest people around you. The other thing you said is that hiring is a talent and one that you can develop. And I've mentioned on the show before, I considered myself really crap at hiring until I joined Uber where 20, 30, 40% of my job was to hire. After you do it for a long time, you start to get good at it and detect patterns. And the thing that I noticed, just as a bit of a practical tip for founders listening, is ask real-world questions about real-world challenges you're facing. And if they have a relatively pragmatic answer without any of the institutional knowledge or unfair advantage that you have being inside the company, well, they're pretty damn good because they're intuitive, they got horsepower. But if they give you an idea that's even better, then they're a rock star. Like, bring them on board immediately.
I could not agree with you more. I'm a fan of assembling an interview team. That team should be able to interview somebody in a day, whether it's virtually or in person. When they come in, assemble your team beforehand and say, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's the time frame this is what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who's going to be able to help us solve this problem. So don't have everybody go through their resume. Have somebody talk to them about what kind of people do you like to work for and with? What drives you, right? What pisses you off? And I always say, put somebody on the interview team who has a track record of hiring great people because they got it. You say you got better at it because you did it more. The other thing is the trick questions make me nuts. I did talk at Google X, and the head of Google X, who's a friend of mine, he comes up and he says, sell me this microphone. I'm like, what? And he's like, that's my question I ask. I'm like, are you hiring me to be a microphone salesperson? Because if you're not, that is the dumbest question or the question that nobody can answer. Right? And I'd interview the people at the end and say, what was the hardest question you had? Well, Stan asked me this question that was impossible to answer. I'm like, why are we having Stan ask people the impossible question? We have him. He knows the answer, right? If we need to answer that question, we've got him. And so the other thing that really helps you to get better at interviewing, at the beginning, as long as you can, at the end of the day you interview, try and assemble everybody together on a Zoom call or in a room and say, what did you think of her, right? And you don't want I liked her a lot. I want to have a beer with her. She's pretty funny. I want to ask, what question did you ask? What answers did she give that made you feel like she would be a good fit? And what you learn about doing that is, that's where I get all my good questions. I steal them from people. I'm like, oh, that's good. I like that. And usually what I do when I interview is I pick something on the resume and I just pull the thread, right? Oh, wow, you were responsible for delivering that product. That's a big, I use that all the time. So tell me about that. It doesn't say you were a manager or director, so were you in charge? No. Oh, you're an individual contributor. Okay, that's great. How many people were on the team? 700. Okay. And was it on time and high quality? No. Okay. Well, what would you do differently next time? Right? Because I don't care if people have screwed up. I want them to learn from it, right? And that's who you want to hire in a startup, especially. You want to hire people who aren't afraid of going out on a limb and trying something and learning from it if it doesn't work.
One of the things that we've been circling around, we called mistake number 1, tolerating mediocre performance and not tolerating mediocre performers, right? And there's a world of difference there. And I think that's one of the things that I really took from your whole approach. You've already mentioned it in passing, is that performance is contextual. It's contextual to the stage of the company, to the culture of the company, to a person's skill sets, to what needs to be done.
That's right.
Right? And so one of the things you talk about a lot in your book is how you hate the word firing and how personal it is and how moving someone on becomes such a personal judgment of their worth. That's how it's often perceived, right? But what we're really saying is, we've talked about sports teams. It's a sports team. It's not a family. There are a lot of specialized positions, right? And what you care about is the overall performance of the team.
And back to context, are you in the minor leagues or are you in the major leagues? Where are you ranked in the standing? Who are your competitors? What are their advantages and disadvantages? What are yours against that? And so that team metaphor really worked for me because people would say, does that mean I have to try out for my job every year? And the answer is, yeah. Don't we all? Isn't that the truth? Like another thing I really hate is I hate annual incentive bonuses. Because when you come down to it, it only incentivizes people to be there on the day you give the bonus, no matter how complicated you make it. If I worked for the company one time, I'm like, so how long have you been doing this? 7 years. Wow, that's interesting. God, it took us 4 hours for me to understand the incentives on this corporate thing. Got stock, you got... I'm like, have you ever not paid it? No. So it's not a performance incentive bonus, it's deferred compensation. All I have to do is be employed on December 31st, and I'm going to get it January 15th, right? So that's what you're incentivizing. By the way,
That's actually your best case scenario, Patty. Quite often along the way, you generate a misalignment with what you actually want people to do because they don't know they're definitely getting their bonus.
And in startups, it's such a waste of time, especially. You got a customer to serve, you got a product to, you got work to do. I mean, nobody needs to be spinning that. It's like when people tell me they want to write a culture deck. I'm like, okay, well, get a product. You referenced the Netflix culture deck. Something a lot of people don't know about that. So if those of you who are out there, if you haven't seen it, it's this
You should.
this PowerPoint presentation. We wrote it. It took us 10 years. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
10 years
10 years.
to write it. And we wrote every chapter after the chapter before. And so back to hiring the right people, one of the chapters is called High Performance. And in order for me to create a system, or for all of us to create a system where we had the vast majority of people really performing what we needed them to do at the time we needed them to do it, it took changes everywhere in the company. I had to make it okay to say goodbye. For example, if all of a sudden we switch from DVD by mail to streaming, and the vast majority of the people are working on DVD by mail. And what we want to do is we want to keep that good and we want to keep it great for our customers. But we don't need 1,000 people in that division anymore. Then there's no reason to put 100 people on a performance improvement plan. It's not that they're not performing. They're performing great. We just don't need them anymore. So what happens on the good goodbye? I am the queen of the good goodbye, and I'm proud of it. It's something like hiring, Chris, that you can learn to be better at it. And people say to me, how come you're so good at giving feedback and hard feedback to people? Answer is, I practice, okay? So if you leave it to the HR person or your manager or somebody else, or you're going to wait until a good time to give somebody feedback about their performance, like in typical performance reviews a year later, then it's highly unlikely they're going to change their behavior because they don't even fucking remember what it is you were talking to them about. So what happens is typically you hire somebody to do a job. They're extraordinarily good at doing it. They do it, and then it's done.
There's one other point I wanted to make here. We were talking about, using this baseball analogy and how we need to have the right team and that performance is contextual to the team.
That's right.
Now, with startups, it is even worse than sports because if you get good enough at baseball, well, guess what? Now you're playing football, right? Like
That's right.
the game keeps changing, right? And like with Netflix, you had those very obvious pivot points from DVDs to streaming, from other people's content to production. But even if
Everybody does.
your business is more linear, right?
And I would venture to say that no business is really linear. So in all the consulting that I've done, the line does go up and to the right. But the truth is, I think it's step functional. You get the right place in the right time. You got the right product. You got enough money. Oh, shit. Half of the time, the problem is that you're successful. And now all of a sudden, somebody wants what you're building and somebody's willing to pay you for it. And now you got to get it done like fast, right? And you got to get it done well. And so that's the other. So one of them is sometimes you hire somebody to do something and they do it and it's done. The second thing is the business changes radically and or the scale. So I think that humans can imagine about 5x, maybe 10x. But it's really hard to imagine 100 unless you've seen 50. Step functional scale is a tough thing to do when you drag everybody along who doesn't really have any experience. That's the second thing. The third one is you change management, you hire a new person, and that person just wouldn't hire that team that you've got. And it just happens. And that's going to happen your whole career. Get used to it. Don't take it personally.
So connecting the dots, right? The reason we're talking about all this is that mediocre performance is a function of context. Context is always changing.
Right.
And therefore, what you said, the good goodbyes is about saying that, of course, you have to move people on you. Of course, you have to change the composition of your team as the game on the field changes, as the context in which you're operating changes. And so that's so important. So, Patty, this would be a good time to move on to mistake number 2.
Yes.
That I think is very common at every stage of a business, but also at startup stage, which is not sharing business context with everybody on the team. Why do you feel so powerfully about this?
Part of it for me personally was I wasn't ever really exposed to it, and I found it really interesting. And so partly because, when you're making your business up, it's fun, right? I mean, it's interesting and fun. So don't hire anybody who can't read a profit and loss statement. Just don't, right? I remember in the first .com bus, I'm interviewing somebody and she's like, okay. You can have profit and revenue. Uh-huh. But you can't have one without the other, but I always forget which one comes first. This was not a completely stupid person, but this person was.
I think I was that person once.
No, but it's like, no, see, like you can't have profit without revenue because like revenue is like the gas that goes in the engine. It won't really go. But those are simple things that everybody should be able to understand. And if they don't, so here's another thing. When I'm looking at you, and I say, God, Yaniv, I mean, I swear to God, this guy is just fucking clueless, right? I see the bubble over your head. I'm like, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, right? Close your eyes and count to 10 and say to yourself, maybe he is. Maybe he just doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't know the difference between profit and revenue because no one's ever told him. Now, if I've told you 5 times and you still go, I don't really understand, then, but I'm saying that's what we did. We just shared that information, assuming that everybody was interested in it. And the more people know about how the machine works, the more they can tweak the machine. So I'm consulting to Warby Parker. This is in my book, right? And Warby Parker, the glasses guys, I wear them all the time, right? They're really upset because they've moved to this is very, 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 very early on for them. They moved to a new place. They can't have their customer service people with them. They're feeling really bad about it. And I say to the CEO, I heard that you're kind of an honest guy, but I think you've been lying to your customer service people. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, because I heard from your recruiters that they tell everybody applying for the job, as Neil Blumenthal says, you can join in customer service and you'll have a fully formed career here for the rest of your life. He's like, they still say that? I'm like, yeah, it's a big fat lie, right? I mean, how many people have gone from customer service to marketing? Because everybody wants to go into marketing. How hard can that be, right? So he says, yeah, I should go talk to them. I make them feel better. I'm like, no, you need to send the CFO. And the CFO needs to say to them, look, here's what the per customer cost to market to a brand new customer is, right? In between advertising and ads, and it costs us $20 a customer to get a new customer. If the customer hangs up from a conversation with you and says to their next door neighbor, I love my Warby Parker glasses, you should really try it. It's the best. Those people are amazing. And they buy their glasses from you, you just put $20 on the bottom line. That's your job, right? Your job isn't dealing with the whiny, crappy customers. Your job is my point is they need to know how much it costs to market to a new person. They need to know that they actually contribute to the P&L directly from the work that they do. And so does everybody.
When we talk about sharing context with everyone, I think it's easy to look at that in a 2-dimensional way and say like, hey, here's our business priorities and here's what our investors are asking for and all this kind of stuff. What you're talking about is sharing the context about how that division contributes to the business in a serious way. But I think what you're also talking about is having a broader sense, a deeper sense, a more ambitious sense of how a department might be contributing than what might be obvious on the surface, right? So people think of customer service as a necessary evil cost center. You're saying there's a deeper context there as well, which is you are part of driving the brand promise. You're part of delivering marketing in a way.
Absolutely. And oh, by the way, you just talked about departments and different teams, right? The other thing you must do with context is when you walk down and you overhear somebody go, yeah, the marketing people, they're just a bunch of idiots, right? It's like, all right, when's the last time you talked to somebody in marketing and asked them about this situation? Again, that's like, if they appear to be clueless, maybe they are.
I feel seen and targeted here, Patty, because I've been that person. I've been the person who didn't really understand what revenue was. I've been the person who said marketing are a bunch of idiots. Yep. And because I started my career at Google for 10 years, right? And so when you're in that big company, it's so easy to get siloed off and cut off from the underlying context of the business.
Which is why we do startups. It's the fun we have. If you've got a startup and you have people that feel like they're in a siloed department, you are screwing it up. Okay? I mean, everybody should feel like there aren't, just like, I mean, I hate to do the metaphor. It's like if you're a halfback, then you're not going to shoot goals. Okay, that's not your job, right? But you need to understand what it takes for everybody work together in order for the team to make a goal and what that goal is and how it's measured. And are you playing soccer or are you playing baseball or are you playing football, right? I mean, so that's part of the context too, is not just how you are doing, but how the whole world of what you're making looks like.
The most obvious version of this is the leadership team sharing all the context with the business and departments sharing context in all hands and being transparent about what they're doing. But I love that you're taking this further, Patty, and you're saying, don't just give them context, give them religion about how their role is affecting the mission of the company, much deeper and broader than they would have imagined, and then giving them permission and maybe even the mandate to dig into other departments.
It's not someone else's business. It's yours too.
That's right. That's right.
And I mean, these are things that I want to teach all of you as leaders, right? You don't have to do this. You don't have to be the conduit, right? So one of my things is when somebody comes and wants to complain about their manager, I let them go until they can't talk anymore. Oh, God, what an asshole. Oh, my God, that must have been terrible. Oh, Jesus. And then what happened? Oh, my God. What did he say when you told him that? Right. Well, I can't possibly tell him that. I'm like, well, you just told me. You seem to find enough words to tell me all about it. Probably wouldn't want to go talk to Chris with this particular tone of voice. And I can help you do that, but I won't do it for you. And in the same vein, when somebody on the team is like, those idiots over there, I don't know what the fuck they're doing over there, is like, okay, who in the room is going to go ask? Or who do you know that can come to the team and explain to us what they're up to and why?
Again, this is not now just about empowering people to do their job with full context. You're now also drawing down the temperature or eliminating the need for office politics. Now it's no longer a gossip game and a bitching game. It's now a, hey, go have a radically candid conversation with that person and go figure out what the hell's going on.
You know, Chris, one of my least favorite words is empowerment. You just said it, so I'll go ahead and jump in and tell you. Here's why I hate the word. As if we've got a magic wand. You're empowered. There you go. You can go talk to him now because I empowered you. It's like
Absolutely, yeah.
people walk in the door with power. The reason why we even bring that word up is because we take it away. So whenever you as a leader feel like you need to empower somebody, try and step back and go, what is it that's keeping them from doing it themselves? And it could be 10 years at Google.
We have to say, it's not that you empower them, it's you avoid disempowering them
No,
through your attitude.
no, that's my whole lot. You know, I'm supposed to be this big innovator in my field, right? Oh, Patty, she's the guru of HR. She's reinvented it. You know, I did all that. I didn't do anything radical. Here's what I did that was radical. I stopped doing stupid stuff that doesn't matter. I just stopped. Why do we do this thing that everybody on God's earth does? Does it make any sense? Does it move the business forward? Does it make a customer happy? Does it increase our profit margins? And does it allow people to do their best work? And if I'm asking somebody who I'm paying $250,000 a year to go ask somebody in finance for permission to spend $5,000 when all the person in finance adds to the equation is, you know, oh, well, that's $5,012. You can't do that. They're going to spend their brain power figuring out how to work around somebody who doesn't know what they're doing in the finance organization rather than solving the problem we need them to solve for the, I mean, it's just like, what an utter waste of time for everybody. Now, that doesn't mean, back to context, that I don't believe in budgets. I do. I think budgeting is a really good exercise. It's a wish list, kind of. It's like, how do we want to make our operating parameters? How do we want to operate during this? And oh, by the way, when something changes, do we have permission to go, you know what? I budgeted this for X, and the truth is, I don't think I need it. So since we got that money, who else could use it? I mean, that kind of selflessness in leaders, when employees see that and hear those stories, that empowers them.
You've just described a lot of your philosophy there, and many of the dysfunctions of an organization, especially as it grows, can be thought of in terms of principal-agent misalignment, right? There's this idea of the principal-agent conflict where you have the actual capital, the actual business as a principal, and all the employees are agents trying to enact the will of the business, but you often get a divergence. And I think what you're trying to do with your philosophy is to make everybody into a principal. You give them the context, you educate them, you make sure that you don't take away their power. You make sure they understand where they fit in so that they're not thinking about themselves as, okay, I am me trying to manage my career and trying to guess what's right. The best way to get ahead in this company, or the best way to succeed in this company, I should say, rather than get ahead, is to understand what the business needs from me and to execute that to the best of my ability.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, if you do that, you will get ahead.
Or eventually you become redundant, right? Like you said, you do yourself out of a job. And one of the things that you talk about is to be a good place to be from.
Yeah.
So what you should feel is if you do yourself out of a job by being so good, or simply because the context changes, you're like, that's great. I've got this on my CV. I'm going to move on to the next phase of my career.
When I left the company was transitioning into becoming a movie studio, right? Original content. That's not my forte. I'm a Silicon Valley geek. I'm not somebody who's going to figure out, is Shonda Rhimes the right person to create Orange is the New Black? Some people can stay a long time because they're really good at being flexible as the company changes. I've been in a million rooms where we've tried to figure out who to promote and who not to promote. You go, oh, shoot, this is a big problem. Who can do that? Chris was really good at that. Remember we had that thing and he just sort of jumped up and he figured it out and we didn't really notice until after it was done. How about him?
Patty, I love that every time you have something good to say about this virtual employee that you point to me, I feel for some reason.
I should.
Oh, no, that's okay. Actually, right after this call, I'm gonna fire Chris, so it's all good. I wanted to take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors, Trilligent. Trilligent is a global strategic advisory firm that is tailored to startups. But what does this mean and what can Trilligent do for you? Say you're looking to expand into a new country. This is one of the riskiest moves any startup can make. It is all too easy to be blindsided by differences in the culture, the competitive landscape, regulatory gotchas, trademark disputes, hiring challenges, and so many other hidden landmines. Even if you get past all that, you're naked. All of your contacts, your reputation, your brand count for nothing. You're starting all over again on foreign ground. All those doors that open for you at home, they stay firmly shut in the new country. It's scary. So, what's a founder to do? Call Trilligent, of course. Trilligent's global presence combined with deep local expertise will give you access to local market experts, regulatory advice, and the best PR people, all under one roof. Plus, Trilligent's advisory board gives you access to an even broader network of domain experts nearly everywhere in the world. So if you've got a specific tricky issue and you need someone who really understands the space, Trilligent have you covered. As a startup, your context and narrative is constantly changing. Partnering with one single firm who truly understands your product and business goals early on is going to lead to greater efficiencies and, more importantly, to better outcomes in the long run. Finally, Trilligent is flexible and founder-friendly from a commercial perspective. Contact Trilligent today at www.trilligent.com and book a call with their wonderful COO Laura to find out how they can help you grow your startup with confidence. That's www.trilligent.com, TRILLIGENT, to speak to Laura, their COO, today. Companies like Atlassian, Quora, and 7,000 others use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. Automate compliance and start scaling your business today. Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast.
We've talked about giving everybody context, and I think you've given some incredible illumination to just how many facets there are to context, and way, way deeper than we've ever spoken about in the show. Thank you so much for that. The next thing here, and this is related, right, is don't just give them context, it's kind of give them authority, right? So mistake number 3 we've got listed here is creating a command and control culture.
Yep.
So you hire really smart people, you give them all the context, and then you just like micromanage them, right?
No, it's so crazy. And so here's a couple of really pragmatic tips for that, right?
Yeah.
So I always say, have an opinion, take a stand, and be right most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be right all the time because we make this shit up, right? And if you're wrong all the time, you're probably not the right person. But I could care less about your opinion unless you're willing to take a stand. So when somebody's like, management should have, whatever, right? There's 2 questions you want to ask, and the second one's more important. First of all, if you're in management, what decision would you make about this? Second of all, if you're in management, what information would you want to have to make the best decision? What information would you want to have to make the best decision for the business? And if you say that over and over and over again, then when the new person shows up and says, well, I have a couple of comments, then the other people are going to be like, well, you better have a solution because we're not really that big on comments. Problem finders, everybody can do that. Problem solvers. So back to you want to be a great place to be from. You want to have a reputation for being a person that jumps in and solves problems, period, end of story. So that's how you do it. You just look around, you see what needs to get done, and you figure out a way to do it. And that's the other side of context, right? Which is people really standing up and taking ownership. And they don't have to take ownership for the direction of the company. They need to take ownership for what it is they do. And if they have an opinion about how somebody else is screwing it up, they need to take ownership and go find out why.
I largely agree with everything you say. There's one slight nuance that I'd like to point out, which is that you want problem solvers and not just problem finders, but you don't want to create a context where someone who has noticed a problem doesn't escalate it, because sometimes you can't solve a problem yourself. And I think it's important that as part of actually taking responsibilities to say, I've noticed this really severe issue and there is somebody in the company who needs to know that. As soon as possible. And I'm going to escalate it fearlessly.
But it's the same thing. It's like, okay, what would you do? I don't know. I really don't know how to solve this. And in fact, I don't even know who would. When I was at Netflix, that was probably 50% of my job was to go, I know who you should talk to. Here's the person that you should talk to. I don't know if they're the person that's responsible for solving the problem, but they know a lot about it. So they can bring you up to speed into where we're at. And here's a great other Netflix story I love. We hired this guy pretty far into the business. He was a data scientist, and we had just started hiring people like that. He was very, 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 very introverted, right? Didn't say much, really geeky. We go to a meeting. He's a pretty senior person. It's the first time he's actually going to present, right? And he puts up his here's the 5 things I think that are critically important based on the information I've seen that we need to work on. And we're all like, yeah, well, we've tried all that stuff before. We've tested all of it and it doesn't work. And he's like, I know you've tested all of it. I'm a data scientist. I've looked at all the tests and so you tested this one on this date at this time. Here are the demographics of the customer base then. And here's the difference in the customer base now. And I mean, it's like all of this stuff that we had tried before, it was the wrong place, wrong time. We didn't have the technology. It was like, oh my God, that whole year, all we did was kind of go, what else have we tried that didn't work that might work again, right? So I totally agree with you 100%. It's the ability to speak up, but it's the ability to speak up sometimes and go, I know it didn't work, but have we thought about trying it again? Or why it didn't work? Help me understand why it didn't work. So that curiosity is also a really, especially in startups, right? And if you're going to look for any intangible when you're hiring people in startups, you definitely don't want somebody who knows what they're doing in some ways. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you want somebody who's curious enough to go, wonder if we did that differently, if that would work. Instead of saying, well, when I was at Google, because God knows I've heard that.
But this is so meta for startups in general, right? It goes all the way back to when people say the idea doesn't matter. What they're really saying is the implementation really, really matters. You might have the same idea as someone else, and they may implement it so incredibly well, and you may implement it crap, and you go, well, that was a dumb idea. But no, it's the implementation detail. And this is true not just for the originating idea, but for every idea and thing you try all the way down the stack, all the way through your journey. And so I will always meet founders who say to me, oh, Chris, we tried that B2C thing and it just didn't work. And so we had to pivot to B2B. And I'm like, did you really try it? Did you implement it really well?
And did you pivot a quarter turn, a half turn, or did you turn yourself around and get really dizzy, right? Because that's another one. I mean, so I hate management speak, but that's another one of those words. It's like, we pivoted. It's like, yeah, you realize you're just fucking wrong.
I took something slightly different from your story about that data scientist, which is, I guess, around courage or what's sometimes called psychological safety, a culture where people can speak up, can call bullshit, can say, sure, you did it, but you didn't do it very well in a room. And I think you talked in your book about fierce intellectual debate, I think might have been the phrase that you used. But this idea that the term psychological safety, unfortunately, has been abused so badly that it's become a bit meaningless. But if you look at the original work, the idea of psychological safety is that we feel free debating each other at an intellectual level because we trust each other at an interpersonal level. And so we can have that courage to take those risks.
It's the thing I miss most about working. I do. I mean, I miss it. I miss it. I pine for it. I pine for going into a meeting and being absolutely sure that I'm right. And I've got it all figured out. I'm going to make my case and I'm going to convince everybody and they're going to listen to me this time because I'm right. And I get proven wrong. And I love it.
Yeah.
Right? That somebody that I respect has listened to me and said, well, I don't think you thought about this, or have you? And I'm like, you're right. I love that. I love being proven wrong with a good intellectual debate, right? And how it moves. And again, as leaders, it's also really, really important to learn how to say you were wrong. So the humility in leadership, Reed was really good at this. I mean, it was one of his very best traits. He would say, hey, by the way, that decision I made, I was wrong. And here's what I knew when I made the decision. Here's the context by which I made the decision. And it turned out that I'm not the average customer. Leaders demonstrating that, this whole, you can't be what you can't see. If you're a leader, a manager, an individual, and you're not willing to walk the talk, then no one else will either. They got to see him.
And it all comes from the top, right? It all comes from the founder and the CEO, which is usually the same person at a startup.
Well, it comes from as many people as you can have it come from. So here's an example. One of the things that was frustrating after a while, and I don't mean to pick on you guys being from Uber and Google, because I certainly hired lots of people from Uber, but
go nuts.
One of the hardest things for me was reprogramming you. So I would have people at a director level who would be like, well, who is it that I'm going to have to present my idea to in order to get approval, in order to execute? I'm like, oh, for God's sake, you've been here a week. Haven't you done anything yet? We hired you to do something, not to present it, right? So just get it done, right? People can't be what they can't see. The more you can demonstrate that, the more they can see. I was going to tell you the story of hire a new person. The new person comes in and says, there's somebody on my team that I don't think is working out, and I want to talk to you about saying goodbye. And I would say, you should talk to Kevin about that. Okay, I know Kevin, and, okay, but I want to talk to you because it's an HR thing and I want to get rid of him. I'm like, you should talk to Kevin about that. He's really good at this. He's learned a lot of lessons about it. He's another manager like you. And so when you create those, I call them lieutenants, right? So people said, oh, when you left Netflix, did the culture go to hell without you? I'm like, no.
You're actually starting to flirt with the fourth mistake, which is avoiding that hard conversation. And so let's kind of formally get into that then. So mistake 4 is avoiding difficult conversations and not having that conversation with Kevin, right? And that is corrosive to the culture, you're saying. And I think absolutely right.
Again, it's practice, practice, practice. The other thing is the hard conversation aren't nearly as hard in the moment. So we're in a meeting. You and I have been talking for the last month, and you've been telling me you think this decision is crap, and you don't think people are thinking about it very much. And we go through the meeting. It's a whole hour. I say to you in the moment, how come you haven't said anything? Did we change your mind? Right? I'm not going to let you off the hook. Everybody knows you disagree. So is that having a hard conversation that's going to make everybody upset and leave you reaching for the Kleenex? No, I'm just going to say, look, dude, if you want to be heard, speak.
Yeah.
Right?
This is really important. Yeah. There is a lot of subtlety and nuance and fine lines here, so I want to speak precisely if I can. There is, I think, an overcorrection towards the thing Yaniv mentioned, psychological safety, around safe spaces, around like not having frank and honest conversations.
To my point, just to very quickly interrupt, Chris, psychological safety has been abused as a term. People use it to mean something other than what it means.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, which is all of these terms and all of their sponsoring thoughts, the pendulum has swung to a degree where there aren't forthright conversations. There is sometimes a diminishing of meritocracy. There is a lack of radical candor, which is corrosive to productivity and making hard things happen in the world. And so, again, I'm trying to be careful here because there are some of these things, or many of these things that have come from a good place and have a kernel of essential truth to them, but that we need to be balanced in those things and make sure we're driving to a mission, driving to an outcome together, right?
I would say intent is 90% of this, right? I wish that I hadn't stole the term radical candor like I did. Although I was talking on my podcast yesterday with somebody who said, if you hadn't added the adjective radical, it wouldn't have been as emotional. Because I want to say, just be honest, right? And if I'm honest with you, and you know that the reason I'm giving you this feedback is that I want you to be the best you can be.
Yeah.
And you know that that's the reason why I'm doing it, you're going to be more open to hearing me. The second thing is people think that giving people feedback means telling them something they did wrong and making them feel kind of shitty, but saying it in a way that's kind of nice so that their feelings won't be hurt. We won't really want to do that, right? And so we do have all this stuff around it. And when this whole psychological safety thing happened, Yaniv, I had dinner with Reed, and I'm like, could I survive in this world now, right, where I have to be careful about everybody's feelings? He's like, no, we'd fire you in a hot minute. Like, because I'm not, no one's ever called me touchy or feely. I mean, I would say, Yaniv, does that make sense to you? It doesn't. Okay, well, then don't do that stupid thing. Okay, there we go.
When I have teams that I'm very comfortable with and we're good at having fun with each other, I'll sometimes say, yeah, can you do that again, but not shit?
Yeah, right, exactly.
But what you're talking about there, though, I want to just make that clear, is candor is not being an asshole. Candor is being forthright, but in a diplomatic...
With a solution. Again, my whole thing is a whole philosophy. Okay, well, if I say not shit, you better tell me what not shit is.
I'm joking when I say...
Right? I know you're joking, but the point is, a lot of times, that's all people get. They walk away and go, he just called me shit.
Let me challenge that a little bit, Patty. It's a challenge and a question to you, really, because being told it's shit is not great, but it is better than not being told it's shit. It's better than being told it's good. Feedback is hard enough to deliver that people are naturally inclined not to deliver it. If you then raise the bar and say, not only do you have to say it wasn't very good, but explain exactly what you need to do to make it better, then you're raising the bar high enough. And it might just be like, you know what? It's too hard. Like, I can't quite put my finger on why it wasn't good. It just wasn't that good, you know? Like, try again.
Then you should try it, right? I mean, so let me give you another counter. Here's a tip. Here's another way to really get great performance by giving someone feedback. Okay, you listening? Everybody take notes now. Find somebody doing something right and tell them.
Yeah.
Whoa! Whole concept here. Okay, so like the radical candor feedback, the giving people negative feedbacks, like that bad thing that you did, that was bad, Yaniv. That was, you know, it was bad. That was shit. If you do that again, you are going to be in such big trouble. And the next time you do it, because you will, you'll feel bad. It's guilt tripping. We all do it if we have kids, right? But here's another one. Oh my God, in the meeting, finally, Chris, thanks for speaking up, because I knew that you disagreed with this, but I didn't ever really understand why. I really appreciate you saying that today. When I knew that it was hard for you, right? And you know what you're going to do? You're going to do that again.
That's right.
Because I didn't say you could have done it differently. I said, in the moment that you did it, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And not only have I given you great feedback, I've given the whole team feedback about what to do right. And it's not like it's impolite not to say thank you. It's really powerful to say thank you. It's really powerful. But the secret to the great feedback is in the moment. Any feedback. The closer you can get to when it's happening, the more powerful it is, more impactful it is if it's positive, and the more you'll get a correction if it's negative. Okay, that was probably not the optimal way you could have done that. Try this instead. And then, by the way, don't forget that you gave that person that feedback. And then when they try it again. So I remember, I don't know, we were early in the company and Reed was an asshole about something. I mean, he was in everybody's shorts. He was micromanaging everybody. He was a big pain in the butt, right? And it became this legend. Remember when, you know how he is. He always does this. And, you know, I was listening to a whole bunch of people doing this. I'm like, oh, for God's sake, you know, we gave him the feedback. He's been working really hard not to do that. That happened 2 years ago. Let it go. I mean, I know it's the stuff of legends, but Jesus, let him make a new mistake. So be good at it. Practice it.
Speaking about hard conversations, I'm curious about this. I just saw Jensen Wong talk about this idea that he criticizes his team in public, in front of everybody. He has like 60 direct reports or something. I was always taught this principle of criticize in private, compliment in public. And he was talking about, he will call somebody out, correct them, and instruct them about the error in logic that they've made so that his whole team can learn how he thinks and to correct their behavior.
We did that too, but it was much more egalitarian than that, right? It wasn't just that Reed got to do that and the rest of us went, oh, I hope I don't get in trouble next time. Our feedback to each other as a leadership team was a thing we did in person, out loud, where we would go around the room and do a thing called stop, start, continue.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an example in my book from our CFO. Okay, so Yaniv, you are such an incredible business person. Your thinking is really complex and interesting. I really love that. I want you to keep doing that. But I'd like you to start sharing it with other people, right? Not just having these conversations with the finance team, but go hang out with the engineers and tell them about how you're thinking about financing and stock buybacks or whatever it is. I think that the way you're thinking is really interesting. And I'd like you to stop being such a moody asshole, because it's really hard for people who need something from you to not know what kind of mood you're in.
Yaniv, she's really got your number dialed in here. This is great.
Well, so this is something that really happened, right? And he said to me, Patty, you just don't like me. And I'm like, no, I like you fine. It just makes me crazy when you do this. And somebody else in the room said, actually, I've calculated how much it costs when 4 of my directors have to come to you for something that only you know, but they have to spend a half an hour deciding who's going to decide if he's in the mood to tell us or not.
Wow.
And she's like, and I calculated their salaries and the time they did that. And so you're costing us money. And he was like, oh. And so at his next all hands team meeting, he said, I've been giving some feedback that actually I've got most of my life. And somebody has to be brave enough to go, you're really unapproachable right now. Is there a better time for me to come back?
All right, Patty. So let's talk about the 5th and final mistake that can really erode your culture, which is practicing HR theater. On the one hand, there's policies, procedures, annual performance reviews, PIPs, etc. But on the other hand, there's like perks, parties, risk aversion, lack of accountability.
When I left Netflix, I was consulting during another boom. It was the evolution of the happiness officer. There were really people I met who had the job title Chief Happiness Officer, right?
That's also Yanev's job on the podcast as well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, come on. You're turning me into a moody arsehole right now.
Yaniv, he's giving you feedback out of love and respect.
Oh, that's really nice.
And you can smack him around when I get off. Okay. So I say to this person, what do you do? Like, when you come to work, what do you do? I mean, order T-shirts or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's 3 parts of HR when I coach people about when to bring an HR person in, which is a common thing for startups to ask me about. Like, when is it that you need somebody? There's 3 parts. One of them is administrative and compliance. It's really, really important. That's like the payroll people and the laws people, the people who they can't sleep because they've spelled your name wrong. They dot the I's, they cross the T's, they're anal retentive, and they know all the rules. You don't want them to make any of them. You just want them to know them, right? If you get in trouble, this is the lawyer's one. We could be sued. I'm like, okay, how much? What's our liability? If we get sued, who's going to sue us? What's it going to cost us? We could be the first people on earth to be sued. I'm like, okay, again, just let me calculate the ROI just like any other business person, right? And I might go, you know what? I don't think that's going to happen, so I'm going to risk that. Mm-hmm. When I got rid of paid time off, our lawyers were like, you can't do that. Right. I got rid of tracking paid time off. I didn't get rid of paid time off. But...
Right. In a way, that's one of the things, at least at the time, you were most famous for.
Oh, yeah.
And Netflix was most famous for. And the way in which it was misunderstood was unbelievable.
It was. And it was misunderstood at Netflix, too. My successors complained a lot about how they had to fix that later, because it became an issue when the demographics turned into lots of people having babies. There wasn't enough structure around it for people to go, hey, by the way, my wife's pregnant. I'll see you in January. Like, whoa, wait, what? You said it's unlimited. I can do whatever I want, so see you tomorrow. And so instead of being like, let's be adults here and make some plans and be rational about it. Most labor law in most countries is written to protect employees from evil, bad bosses. That's why they're written. They're not written to screw people and make things horrible. They're written because somebody was exploited or treated wrongly, and so they made a law to make it better. Most of the things that HR people write policy about are not law.
Yeah, they're very conservative.
Right. They are to keep you from getting sued, to protect the company from the evil employee that might sue you. So here's what I tell HR people. Go into work. Back in the day when we used to all go into work. Stand outside the front door, watch everybody come in and say, they're going to sue me, they're going to sue me, they're going to sue me, they're going to sue. They're not. So it's like, we don't need a rule to protect ourselves against the 1%. The 90% of the people have to operate in a certain way because the 1% might screw you. You know why people sue companies? Because they're pissed off. And here's why they're pissed off. They haven't gotten any feedback. Everything's gone perfectly fine. All of a sudden, they're shit. and their boss has, gotten all uptight. The boss comes into me in HR and says, you know what, that Patty? I am sick and tired of her. I told her time and time again, she does this one more time and I'm firing her. And I would say, let me go ask her how she thinks she's doing. Well, I actually told her 9 months ago. Like, yeah, right. So she thinks she's fine. So anyway, this happens. The person gets fired. They say, this is not fair. I never got any warning. I always got great reviews. Everything's wonderful. This has to be because, it's got to be because I'm a woman, because nothing else makes any sense to me. And, oh, by the way, when I say what exactly went on here, everybody's like, well,
Yeah.
So here's how you don't get sued. Don't piss them off.
Don't blindside them.
Don't blindside. Here's my 2 rules for termination. You could not be surprised, and you had to keep your dignity.
Yeah.
And so if I was going to blindside somebody and they were going to start hysterically crying, my rules were broken, and the person in trouble was not the person that we said goodbye to.
Yep.
The person that was in trouble was the person that, now somebody's got to teach you how to do that right. So back to your meta question is, my function has gone through a lot of different evolutions, and one of them is to protect you from those evil employees that might sue you. One of them is to make everybody gloriously happy, and that'll make everything wonderful. That's the chief happiness officer, because happy employees do better work. You know what happy employees are? Happier. I said to this person I met who was the chief happiness officer, and I said, okay, everybody on the team, come on in. I got an assignment for you. I want each of you to find 3 people in the organization, doesn't matter what their rank is, who everybody thinks does a great job. Give me 3 people that you know are people who really have a reputation for contributing to moving the business forward. And ask them, tell me about the time when you felt like you did great work. Tell me about the time when you really felt like you contributed. And every single story will be about something hard. Because you don't go home and tell your pet or your spouse, it was a great day at work today. We all got new T-shirts and we had cookies with macadamia nuts. You go home and go, we did it.
This is true, I think, of high-performing people with high-performing teams. And I remember we probably could have a whole episode about Travis and the HR mistakes and the narrative and all that sort of stuff. I don't believe in some of that narrative, and I'd love to debate and discuss that with you at some time. But one of the things he would say is, like, when people would talk about HR or they would talk about perks or they would talk about this or that, he'd be like, the ultimate perk is to work on hard things. And he would also say, if one of your direct reports is complaining about the snacks in the kitchen, you should get fired because you're not giving them hard enough problems to work on.
I know, when the pandemic happened, I was like, oh my God, how are the software engineers going to have breakfast? They're going to starve without their cereal. What about a double latte? It's going to be...
I worked with people at Google who, when there was a long weekend, they would panic because they had no food in their house. They load up on dinner on Friday night and waited till Monday morning to eat again.
The head of HR at Google, Laszlo Bach, Laszlo and I are kind of friends, and Laszlo would be like, they fucking take home stuff for the weekend for their whole families and their mom and dad.
But it was Laszlo's fault, to your point, right? Ultimately.
Yeah, right. And we could have a long conversation about Travis because he did a lot of stuff that was really stupid. But I think he's right. And I think that the best perk I think that you can give people is to have other stunning colleagues to work with.
That's right.
When you feel like you're part of an elite team and that everybody around you could maybe be slightly better than you, then you work. And oh, by the way, you get incredible stuff done that makes you really proud. And so that's why there's a need for some policies and procedures. But I'll give you one last story. It was about dogs at work, right? What's our policy on dogs? Because somebody brought a puppy and it peed in the kitchen, and another had this like 3-legged dog that was just evil incarnate. It was biting people, right? So this is back in the day when I could send an email out to everybody, and I'm like, dogs at work, people are asking me about a policy. If you make me write a policy, it's going to be easy. It's going to say no dogs at work. But let's discuss, right? So for the first 25, 35, 40 emails, it was like, I love dogs at work. You know, when we got rid of dogs at work, it excited home. The company went to hell. Dogs are wonderful. Dogs are my companions. Dogs are dogs. Da, 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 da. About midnight, one of the executives, head of products, said, I got bit when I was a kid. I am absolutely terrified. And he was like the 7-foot tall guy. He's like, I am absolutely petrified. I can hardly breathe. Somebody else said, I'm allergic. And so this one particular meeting, I mean, everybody thinks I'm a space cadet because I have to take my allergy meds before I come in because you bring a dog at work. Somebody else goes, you mean Harvey? Melissa, how come you never said anything? And she said, how come you never asked? And before I was done, my dog policy was written, which was probably not a good idea unless you ask your coworkers if that's okay with them.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, then don't.
It's so fascinating. Being an adult is hard. Working in groups of people is hard. But treating people like adults is really the secret to all of this. And we would love to have you back, Patty, to talk a bit more about, why this is so hard and some of the mistakes and pitfalls you can make. But this has just been an absolute masterclass. So thank you so much for being generous with your time and coming on the show and talking people through these top 5 mistakes that people make and founders make when building a team. So just as a reminder to folks, your book, Powerful, Building a Culture of Freedom and Responsibility, available where all good books are sold and also as a fantastic audiobook, by the way, and your new podcast, TruthWorks, which is really a lot of fun to listen to. Is there anywhere else you'd like people to find you if they want to get in touch?
It's easy enough. My website is pattymccord.com, Patty. And so that's a good way to find out what I'm up to.
And Chris, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm all over the social webs at Chris Sard, and you can find me at chrissard.com and chrissard.com/newsletter, where you can subscribe to my newsletter there. How about you, Yaniv?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so check me out there, and also occasionally on Twitter for some of my spicier stuff at @YBernstein.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking to startup folks. Do it, folks. Keep trucking.
This has been so much fun, Patty. We would love to have you back.
It was a heap of fun, and let me use that as a fun little segue to the Startup Podcast Pact, because like I said, it has taken me over a year to get Patty on this show, and one of the ways we can get great guests is by offering those guests a decent-sized audience. The bigger this podcast grows, the better the guests are that we can get, and the better the show becomes. So it makes a huge difference to us if you are able to subscribe to us in your favorite listening app and on YouTube, and give us a shout out on your favorite social media app. This is how we grow. This is how we get the great guests.
And Chris, you did a really good job today. I just want to let you know.
I'm actually trying to figure out why I get all warm and fuzzy when you say nice things about me. I got to talk to someone about that.
So did you, Yaniv. Thank you. And thank you for spending a whole year pursuing me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for not telling me to fuck off. I mean, that's beautiful of you. I'm glad we finally managed to make it work.
All right. See you guys.
Thank you so much, Patty. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. To sell to the enterprise, proving security is essential. Vanta allows you to breeze your way through to SOC 2, ISO 27001, or Essential 8 compliance and unlock major growth for your company. Go to vanta.com/TSP today. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to claim your $1,000 off.